It's that time of year again. The U.S. Amateur is held in Tucson, Arizona once again. I presented a little video of what it's like to drive to and walk into a tournament so that there's utter confusion for everybody, and I hope you enjoyed that. But let's get on to some games now. I think that's what all of you want to see. But real quickly, before we go on, I know there's a lot of viewers from Tucson that check out these videos, and that's great. Be sure to tell all your friends to check these out too. I like to do local interest stuff as much as I can. And you can search for the videos I've done by putting in my handle in the search bar, sfarmer29, and that'll bring up all the videos. Or you can go to yetmanbrothers.com and there's a video link page there as well. So be sure to tell your friends to come and check out these videos, vote on them. Become a member of this site if you are not, so that you can leave comments, and I don't believe that there is a charge for being a member. There are some pay-per-view videos on here, and I do some myself from time to time, but there's a lot of free stuff on here that's worth your attention. By all means, check out the site. You can do searches for openings, you can do it for endgames, players' names, a lot of different ways. So take a look around and enjoy the site and become a subscriber to the site. Now, on to the U.S. Amateur. The first game I'm going to bring you is actually from the second round. And I'm going to skip around on these games because I have to put in the games myself. And if there's anybody out there that's local that can help me put in the games so that I can just have the PGN to work with and do videos from them, that would save me a whole lot of time. But I'd like to put the games into PGN for others to see as well. And I'll send those to SACA. I've done that in the past. Whether they post them or not, that's up to them. But there you have it. If they're active, they'll update it and they'll add the PGN files. Now at this year's Amateur, Karen Pennick and Kiki Huerta. Kiki is the tournament director and Karen is the organizer, and those guys have done a wonderful job for many, many years bringing the U.S. Amateur. But they had an announcement. They're stepping down from SACA. Kiki is the president and Karen is the vice president. But they're going to be stepping down, so there's going to be a big election coming up. And I urge all of you to learn as much as you can about the candidates. If you can come to the SACA meeting that they're going to have, I think at the Yo Pueblo, it's worth attending it and seeing what's going on. I talked to Karen briefly about what her plans are. She plans on holding the Amateur at least one more year, but we need to find an organizer to run the tournament after that. And she hopes to continue on with the Tucson Open and the Yo Pueblo, the YOP. Also, above that, what she wants to do is create a Master Trek program here in Tucson. They have it up in Phoenix, and it's a pretty nice program where decent players get a chance to play at slower time controls, and they get to play other decent players. They don't get that much of a chance here in Tucson, so Karen's going to try and start something up down here. I've been to several of the Master Treks up in Phoenix. I haven't played in any, but Rob Keogh played in a lot of them. So it's open to all different ratings and all different ages. So I think this is a good middle ground that we need for the youth coming up, is a place for them to sharpen their skills, not in just main tournaments, but you know, if you have one weekend available to go and play in one of these Master Treks, or actually maybe just one day, it's going to be a little bit faster time control than the regular classical tournaments, but it's still going to be a decent pace so that you're not trying to play the whole game in just an hour. And that brings me to my next point. In this year's Amateur, the West Regional that is, we only had one player rated above 2,000, and that was Stephen Pennick. And he was beaten by Srikar Bomireddy in the first round, and he withdrew. Outside of that, there were only 9 players between the 18 and 1900 levels. I'm sorry, there was only 8 players between 1900 and 2000. There was only 9 players between 1800 and 1900, and 6 between 1700 and 1800. Everybody else was below that level. So you can see the problem here for stronger players. It's not really worthwhile to go into a tournament, I can speak from experience on this, that you're playing down almost every round. And if you lose a gob of rating points. And if you win, you don't win much at all. I had a good year, I think it was, I can't remember what year it was, but I finished third, I went undefeated, and I lost 2 rating points. Figure out how that happens. And it kind of sucks when you lose your first round, because that's usually where your biggest rating disparity is going to be all tournament long. And so when you're upset in the first round, you lose a lot of rating points. And then you feel out of form, so you withdraw from the tournament, which means you don't have a chance to go and win the remaining 5 games, which is possible. But by doing that, you'd only gain back maybe half or a third of the rating points you lost from the first round game. So hopefully Master Trek will help to solve that problem and start to bring more high-rated players to the U.S. Amateur. Now, it's not quite the same problem with the Tucson Open or the Yale Pueblo, because we're now starting to draw in grandmasters as well as our locals. We're able to get people from all over the country. Yermolinsky's been here. Wojtkiewicz came when he was still around. We've had many great players come through Tucson to play in the Yale Pueblo and the Tucson Open, and I hope that will continue. Now, when I'm making all these statements, I don't mean to take anything away from the players that did well, like Amrit, Rohan, Anthony. They all tied for first place, and they played good chess. But if you threw in a mix of a few more 2,000 and up players, the situation could very well be different. I mean, we have to be honest about it. Okay, so the game that we're going to look at in this presentation is between Kyle Twitchell, playing white. He's rated 1578, and Matthew David, who's rated 1479. Now, as most of you know, to make it onto my videos, if you're not a master, you're going to have to either play a splendid game or you're going to have to mess up. Well, from what I've seen so far of the scores from the U.S. Amateur, it's been the latter for the most part. I'm taking a break from covering the U.S. Open because those games require some real serious thought, because I want to get across the thought process the players are going through when they're making their decisions on certain moves. At this level, it's a lot more fun for me because it's a lot easier to see what's going on in the players' minds, because they'll make a tactical error, they'll overlook a way to pounce on it, and it's very easy to explain that. Whereas you can get Gadakamsky in the U.S. Open playing a slow positional game because he knows his opponent. There's psychological reasons behind it more than there is on the chessboard. Here at the U.S. Amateur, it's kill or be killed. Alright, Kyle starts out with e4, and then we have e6, d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop d3, bishop b4, e5, knight fd7, knight f3, h6 is now played. More common here is c5, but we're not going to do an opening survey here. We're just going to get into the nuts and bolts of the games. In castles, bishop d2, bishop e7, knight e2, now c5, c3, knight c6, queen c2, and now f5 was played by Matt. And it's not the best move. It's best to play c4. Just what does white do here? Well, it leads to an equal game. He can play bishop to h7 check. It's really the only move that saves the piece. And after king to h8, he can try b4, but after b5, we just have a level and locked up game. Now, if black ever plays g6, white, of course, is going to sack the bishop and end up getting a perpetual check over there. Or worse for black, but if black defends decently, it's just going to be a perpetual. So it's an equal game here. However, after f5, and he takes and takes, now we have somewhat of a Tarrasch, but I think white's in a little better position here than in most Tarrasch lines. Rook fe1, cd4, and now white should really take with the e-knight. He takes with the pawn. Let's step back just real briefly, give you an idea. Knight e takes d4, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop d6, rook ac1. This is going to be similar as to what we see in the game. However, one set of minors has been traded off. Now, one would think that that benefits black, but actually I think it benefits white, because white is now working for domination on the c and e files, whereas if that knight's still on e2, that's not the case. So c takes d4 is played by Kyle, and now bishop d7 was played. I think that he needs to guard control of f4 square. This is a very standard motif in the French defense Tarrasch lines. And after bishop f4, we get this kind of thing. White's a little bit better, but it's pretty much a standard type position. Instead, Matt played bishop to d7, now knight f4, rook c8, queen b3, and now queen to c7 was played. This is one of those situations where it's actually much easier to play as white. Well, quite simply, he's got a target on e6, and black has a weakened light square complex around his king. So if we go back instead of queen c7 and try and come up with a different plan, knight to g4 is a very standard type idea in the Tarrasch lines. This may be a little different because of the position of the bishops for white. Okay, h3. And now he has to try something like bishop d6. An interesting try is knight takes f2, king takes f2, and bishop d6 here. And after g3, queen f6. He's given up a piece or a pawn, but the idea is to open up files and lines for attack on the white king. Don't think he gets quite enough for it here. So instead of knight takes f2, bishop to d6. I mean, he could drop the knight back, but that just means knight g4 was a wasted move. So bishop d6, knight takes e6, bishop takes, rook takes, now knight takes f2. And the point of this is if white takes, king takes f2, this is not good at all, because if knight takes d4, hits the queen, and we're putting pressure on the knight on f3. So queen to d1, queen checks, king f1, and now rook takes knight. And after pawn takes, queen takes h3, this is just crushing for black. So after knight takes f2 here, we do not take the knight, we just go bishop to g6. Building up a positional bind on black. Queen to d7 and rook a e1. White's probably just a tiny bit better here, but it's kind of position that if you're a Tarrasch player, you'd say, this is great. Let's go back to our game. Queen to c7 was played by Matt. Alright, knight takes e6, gets the pawn. Now white's clearly better here. Rook c to d8. And rook a e1 was played, and I think that white was underestimating the power of the dark side here. h3 was a necessary precautionary move that maintains a nice advantage for white. Yeah, if he goes h3, he'll avoid a lot of the headaches we'll see here. But rook a e1 was played, and now knight to g4. White's sense of danger really has evaded him in this position here. He plays bishop to e3. Okay. It was better to play rook 6 to e4. It's hard to blame Kyle, as this is the only move that holds the game together. And it's not easy to see why. Now after h5, rook takes e7, knight takes and h3. Black can try sacking. Pawn takes knight, rook f7, and now pawn takes on h5. And it's not an easy line to spot. And if you'd like to go over it again, I'll get back to that position there, and you can discuss for yourself. First of all, why does he take here? Well, where's the rook going to go otherwise? And there's a sack coming on f3 anyhow, so he's got to be very careful. So rook takes, knight takes now h3, and now he takes here, and if you take the rook, queen h2, queen f2, ends the game. So you got to take the knight. Now the rook's not really serving a purpose on f3 anymore because the knight's gone, runs back, and now pawn takes on h5. Yeah, it's a complicated game, but it was the only chance to stay alive. However, after the move played in the game, bishop to e3, let me flip the board for you. Okay, so now you're playing black. What move do you play here? And that's a winning move, actually. So go ahead and take your time and pause the video, and when you're satisfied with your answer, hit play and see if we got it right. Okay, well, hopefully you did take some time and you figured out rook takes f3. We saw this idea already, but how do you follow it up? He plays pawn takes, and to be honest, actually g3 is a better move, but you might as well resign if you're just going to give pieces away. So he took queen h2, king f1, knight takes e3 check, and white is in deep doo-doo here. And here he plays rook 6 to e3. Stepping back, I would just like to point out that if f takes e3, well, do you see the problem with that? Sure you do. bishop h4 is threatening mate. White has to defend it, and there's really only one good way to do it. But this even falls short after queen h1, king to e2, and now queen takes rook as mate. But okay. He played rook 6 takes e3, and we're still looking at it from the black side right now. Poor White. I mean, he's got to be looking at this position like he's looking down a double-barreled shotgun. The only question is, does the guy have enough guts to pull the trigger? Well, here Matt pulled the trigger, but nothing really happened. He played bishop to h4, and this is not the best move. So let's take a step back. Alright, sweat is pouring down the gunman's face from the pressure, and it gets in his eyes. He misfires. He plays bishop to h4. Now it's time to grab the barrel of the gun and give the guy a swift right hook to the temple. This is actually where I came in on the game, was right as he played bishop h4. Now, at that point, I only looked at what White could do to get out of this. Let's put that on the board here. I found a way for White to get out of this mess. And he's in very hot water. He's got to find a very accurate way to get out of this. But let's look at the proper follow-up for Black. Black to move and win. You're playing Black. What move would you play to end the game rather quickly? Pause the video, and when you are convinced you have the right move in mind, hit play, and we'll see if you got it right. Alright, well, surely you found a move, knight takes d4. This was overlooked. And it's a shame, because it's a game ender. It's hitting the queen, and it's guarding the e2 flight square from the white king. Queen to h1 mate cannot be avoided. It just cannot. I mean, there's some spy checks that you could throw in, but that's not going to save the game. That's just going to give up more material. Yeah, knight to d4 was a crusher. Alright, after rook 6 takes e3, then we have bishop to h4. Let's flip the board one more time. Okay, quiz time yet again. It's White to move, and what does he play to save the game? You're playing White, and how can you save the game? Alright, pause the video. When you're sure you have the right answer, hit play, and we'll see. Okay, in the game Kyle played queen to h2, which is a horrible mistake, and it should lose. But okay, let's go back. What is the answer here then? I actually saw this pretty quickly. I was standing there and I calculated it out, and I couldn't wait to get home to see if I was right. And indeed I was. It's rook to e8 check. Now, what's the point here? If he goes king to f7, that's not going to help him any. If we take on b7, king f6, and look at this, lo and behold, White is giving mate. So, after rook e8 check, he should take. And then we take, and that forces king to f7. Remember that bishop's on d3. Queen takes b7. Now, it only makes sense to grab the rook, otherwise he's going to get in hot water. And now queen takes knight. King to e7. Now, it doesn't really matter where the black king goes to in this variation. In all variations, he's not going to be able to come up to the 5th rank, or he should be very scared to, let's put it that way. And since he can't do that, he's going to be checked to death on the 6th, 7th, and 8th ranks. And while White is doing this, he's picking up pawns with tempo. Now, if king f7 here, he's in danger of getting mated. So bishop g6, queen checks. And then here, we see what happens. White comes back to defend the f2 pawn in the most efficient way possible by taking the queen. Alright. So in this variation, going back here, instead of king f7, king to e7, queen b7 check, king f8, check, takes another pawn, queen a8, king f7, bishop c4. I mean, he can just gradually keep giving these checks until he's in perfect position to come back and guard the f2 pawn. And when he does that, he's quite safe, and he's actually 3 pawns up right now. Now, don't let that fool you. He's still got a bishop's of opposite color ending the face, which makes it rather difficult. But for example, here he could even play g5, and he has a pretty good edge. I think I'd be able to win this probably 90-95% of the time with white. The other 10 or 5% is when I fall asleep. But we can see black's peril here, as he could never get up out of the checks, and that would allow white to come back and defend his f2 square, which is the only threat that black really has in this position. Alright, let's go back to our game where white played queen to c2. Black now could continue the attack, but he does not. He sees a check and he gives a check. Alright, what I'm going to say might sound kind of harsh. You know the saying, Patzer sees check, Patzer gives check. We've all heard that saying, and I'm sure we've all been guilty of it. Me, more than my fair share, I'm sure. But there's another saying in chess. So let's drop back a move. And that other saying is, invite everybody to the party. Let's flip the board. Okay, now you're looking at it from the black side. Black to move and continue the attack. What do? Don't tell me you shoot the hostage. Pause the video, look for a move, and when you're happy with your answer, hit play, and we'll see if you got it right. Alright, the move he should play here is rook to f8. Now, in the line we were just looking at before, rook to e8 saved white's butt. Here, it's not check any longer. So that's a big difference. Alright, the problem for white here is that the pawn on d4 is attacked, and we saw what happens if that pawn is taken. The e2 square is taken away from the king. So he's got to defend that, and I think the best way to do that is with rook to d1. So if knight takes d4, we got bishop to h7 check, and then rook takes knight on d4. But here comes the real poser to this problem for black. What does he do now? How does he continue the attack? Okay, well, if you really want to get a grip on being a good, strong tactical player, this is the kind of move that you need to find. Black to play and continue the attack. Go ahead and pause the video. I know there's a lot of quizzes in this one, but I think it's very instructive. So, what would you play as black? Pause the video, look for a move, and when you come up with a candidate or two, hit play, and we'll see if you got it right. Okay, the move that you needed to find is magical and mystical. It's bishop g5. And I give this 2 exclamation marks. That's the kind of annotation you usually see to a very deep combination or an amazing sacrifice. But here, it is both a brilliant positional and tactical solution to this puzzle here. It's not that the bishop hits the rook on e3, though that is a part of it. The biggest part of it is that it's controlling the dark squares, or it's attempting to at least. And here's the situation. When you have bishops of opposite color, as we do here, the person who has the attack has the advantage because the opponent cannot defend with his bishop on the same squares that you're attacking. So if you have the dark squared bishop, you want a dark squared complex attack. Now later in the game, if your attack doesn't come through, the opposite colored bishops can draw many amazing positions, so you have to be careful of that. But in this case, the bishop being able to control the dark squares is very important. All right, so what is white to do here? Well, first of all, if he runs away with the rook, let's take a look at that. Well, this doesn't work out too well. Queen checks, and now knight takes d4's mate. Alright. How about if he goes to e4? Hey, it's a desperation type move, but at least it covers the d4 square. Do we take the rook? No, of course not. Queen checks. King has to come off the back rank. Now we take the pawn on f3. King has to go back to f1 or e1. And now knight to b4, hitting the queen and the bishop. And it's just raining crap on white. Queen to e2. We check. Queen goes back to block. Knight takes on d3 with check. Rook takes. Now we can take the rook on e4 with check. King to d1, rook to c8. And the rain parade has not stopped for white. He's just in a world of hurts. You can try rook to c3 here, but he's already a piece and a pawn down. But it gets worse, folks. Boom. Yeah. That's what it comes out to being. Okay, let's go back. That was a rather long variation, but it's all pretty forced. What if he tries f4 to block that bishop out? Well, we just take it. It doesn't really change that much. He can throw in a check, queen c5, bishop to d6. Alright, so now we're threatening mate on f2. We're hitting the queen. And if he moves the queen anywhere but to c2, we'll pick up the bishop on h7. Well, actually, he has to go to c2. It guards the mate. So that's forced. Knight to b4. And now the problem is, the only two squares the queen can go to do not protect the f2 square. So the bishop on h7 is lost. That was a shorter variation, but easy to understand. And finally, what if queen c5 right away? Well, here we have bishop takes rook, more threatening mate. Queen takes d5 with check, king h8, now f takes e3. That removes the mate for right now, but queen to h1, king to e2, queen to g2. King has to go to e1. Rook takes f3, we're threatening mate again. Bishop e2, giving him a d2 square. Now we check here. And king goes up, and you'll notice we're still playing on the dark squares here. Just working right around the white bishop. King to e1, and now rook to g3. And it's all over. So if we go back to our game position, take a moment from this position and see if you can find what happens after rook to f8 here, and see if you can replay those variations that we just went over. Go ahead and pause the video and do that so that you can increase your visualization skills. Alright, we're going to go on with our game here. After queen c2, queen h1 check was played. King to e2, now knight takes d4. I mean, this was a cute little combination, and I saw this as a possibility too, but I thought rook f8 just piling on the heat was better. Although I didn't see all those lines absolutely concretely, I just figured it had to lead to an overwhelming attack. Alright, yeah, this cute little combination gets black into a slightly better position, but it's a shame because there was so much more. King to d2, now queen takes rook was played, and this I didn't understand. Here, I thought he was going to play knight takes f3. King to d1, knight takes rook, rook takes, now queen f3 check. Yeah, he's up 2 pawns now. Black is up 2 pawns. It should be a winning endgame for him. Again, you got bishops opposite color, but white's still under some pressure here. Alright, but that's enough said about this line. Knight takes f3. It just seemed like a much sharper way to go. But queen takes e1, king takes, knight takes c2, bishop c2, and king f7, stopping the white rook from coming into e7. And by doing so, he ensures himself of a superior position, and he's a pawn up. And white has doubled f pawns, which means black has that passed h pawn, which will end up being a huge threat later on in the game. Now, this is not a cop-out, but I'm going to end the game here. White went on to win, but that's because black ended up dropping a piece later on. Also, another reason I'm not continuing with the game is in a few more moves, the score was incomplete. It was inaccurate. So I couldn't play through the rest of the game knowing for sure what was played. Although Kyle was nice enough to write the moves down. Both were keeping score in a chess book, so they were not required to keep score on one of those carbonless copies that they keep for tournaments. And I think that's a shame. We've lost a lot of very good games to both the Monroy and whatever that new program is you can use on the cell phone that will lock out any other communications. I can't remember the name of it. And chess books. I've just never been a fan of them. The chess books I don't understand paying money for something like that, because I come home with my score sheet, I put the game in on the database, and throw the score sheet away. I have really no books that I use for chess anymore these days. Everything's on computer. So if you are one that records your games in a chess book or in a Monroy, and you want to have your games reviewed and looked at here on Chess Videos TV, write it down on one of the score sheets and submit it with the rest of the games. It will be looked at. I guarantee you I look at all the games. Sometimes it's very frustrating because a lot of people don't know how to keep score properly. But that's okay. I can read all sorts of languages. So if you're writing in French, Spanish, German, Russian, Canadian, I can read all those. So if you can't tell A1 from A8, or the situation where two knights can reach a square and you just put knight to D7, that really pisses me off. I have to sit there and try and figure out what you did. I have to look ahead several moves. Alright, I'm going to stop ranting on that. Keep proper score. It's part of the game. I do want to mention that I think that Kyle and Matt here rushed their moves in critical positions, especially where the attack was starting to unfold. I think they moved rather too quickly. I think that's a problem that the youth face coming up these days because they don't get to play in classical tournaments all that much. I'm used to that time control. I'm used to non-sudden death events. I'm used to playing 40 and 2, 20 and 1. Actually, when I started, it was even slower time controls. Now I'm used to the game in 90 situation with the delay. I don't find it as much fun. However, that is what it is. So if you have that time, that is just as important to use properly as it is to know a rook and pawn endgame or king and pawn endgame. If you don't handle your clock properly, you are going to lose. So, if you got time, take time. If you don't have time, you have to rush things. But if you have time, you don't have to rush things. Alright folks, that's it for this video. I will be bringing more. Hopefully tomorrow I'll post another one. And I'll keep them up as quick as I can. And as soon as I've gone through all the decent looking games here, I'll return back to the US Championship games and cover some highlights from that event. Alright folks, until next time, good luck.